Welcome, everyone. My name is Roberto Kulpa, and together with Katia, Filep, and Ada Zabrzewska, we welcome you to today's event, during which we want to discuss anti-gender, so-called anti-gender mobilizations, whatever we understand by this term. Hopefully, in the due course of today, we'll discuss this more. We are, as you've seen on the program, we have divided the whole day into 4 sections. We shall start this morning now with a short presentation of the Resist project findings with introduction to the Resist. This will take us around 1 hour. Then we'll take here locally a little break for tea and coffee, and we'll continue in the local discussion. Then after the lunch break in the afternoon, as scheduled, we will come back online again. And I hope to see all of you joining us online again. Then when 3 of our guest speakers will engage more and broaden our discussion to think more about the whole region of Poland, Belarus, Ukraine, and Russia, and transnationally about the flows and then ebbs of anti-gender movements. And then after the presentations, we'll go offline for continuing discussion here in person. There is a functionality of questions and answers, I believe, online. For those of you who have any questions, please do write them. It will be easier for us to manage here. Towards the end, after the presentations, we'll have a short Q&A session, and we'll try to answer them as well. Okay, without further ado, let's go. I'll pass on to Ada Zabrzewska, colleague of mine, who will introduce the project. Yes, okay. One more thing, one more confirmation that you can see the slideshow that we are sharing online. Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
Yep. 1 second, we have technical problems inside the room. All right. So basically, this presentation is meant to give you a short overview of the Resist project, and it's intended to give you a glimpse into the ideas and people behind it, its structure, its findings, and where to find those findings if you want to use them in your own research and activist work. Now, in general, Resist addresses, Roberto, how do I change the slide?
Okay.
Did she do this? Okay, cool. Okay, perfect. There we go. So in general, Resist addresses anti-gender politics that imperil equality, gender and sexual diversity, and legitimacy of critical knowledge in contemporary Europe, because we agree that these politics pose a serious threat to modern democracies and people's everyday lives, bodily integrity, and self-determination, which makes queer feminist resistances even more urgent and even more pressing. And our project aims to support queer feminist mobilizations by creating new understandings of both the effects and the strategies against anti-gender politics in Europe. Now, we are a research consortium of 10 organizations with co-investigators working across multiple disciplines, including sociology, human geography, philosophy, gender studies, and much more. And we draw on a queer feminist efforts of collaborative work, actively engaging multiple civil society organizations, including informal collectives. Now, the core team of Resist is composed of 10 co-investigators and 2 project managers, but the total number of people would probably come closer to 20 if you count the postdocs and research assistants. And each co-investigator leads on a given national or transnational case study, and some of them double as leads of specific stages of the project, with the whole team contributing to the outputs from that stage. Sorry?
To mute the microphones.
Yes, a request for the people listening to us online. Could you please mute your microphones? Thank you. Okay, moving on. And there is a request from the waiting room, and I cannot multitask. Of Satan. Okay. Okay, so now we know the team. Now we move on to the research structure. So RESIST was designed in 5 research stages. We are currently nearing the completion of stage 3. So the dots on this graph represent when a specific stage ends and when the next one begins. And in the first stage, we are collaborating with 40 queer feminist and sex work organizations across Europe. However, this stage is considered confidential, so I will not be able to talk more about it. I will tell you something about the first 2 stages, whose results are publicly available. But before that, let me just briefly tell you what still lies ahead of us. So stage 4 will be dedicated to reinvigorating understandings of anti-gender politics by merging activist experiences with academic concepts. And stage 5 will focus on creating sustainable impact through proactive communication, advocacy with European policymakers, an online learning course. We also have a documentary film coming up, and hopefully all this will generate lasting impact also after the lifespan of the project. And stage 5, that's me and Roberto. Now, going back to the first 2 stages, the team started by mapping and explaining anti-gender strategies and mobilizations across 5 case study contexts: the European Parliament, the UK, Hungary, Poland, and Switzerland. And the team analyzed approximately 200 parliamentary debates and over 100,000 media articles publicized across all case study contexts in between 2015 and 2022. And also a controversy mapping exercise was conducted using network analysis to examine anti-gender actors and connections in public controversies. And this stage of the project confirmed that the very concept of gender is framed in those anti-gender discourses as a threat to the heteronormative nuclear family, particularly to children. That's a staple in those discourses, as well as a threat to sex-based roles and identities conventionally understood, as well as a threat to the nation as such, with anti-gender politics being presented as a defense of democracy and sovereignty against feminist and LGBTQ+ movements, which in turn were framed as dogmatic, authoritarian, and excessive in their ideological demands. And in contexts such as Hungary and Poland, gender ideology was framed as a foreign import that is being imposed on unwilling local populations. In contrast, such rhetoric was missing from the UK case study. It was also confirmed that anti-gender politics deny the rights of women and LGBTQ+ individuals. I mean, that's not a surprise, with particularly hostile stances taken towards transgender persons, with transgender identities being framed as a product of ideological influence or manipulation. The so-called trans lobby was object of attacks, particularly in the UK context, while in Hungary and Poland, those discourses operated mostly with a more nebulous term of gender ideology broadly understood. Of course, we will see how that changes in the upcoming years. And anti-gender claims often overlap with anti-immigrant sentiments, particularly in Switzerland and in the European Parliament, fostering not only homophobic and transphobic discourses, but also racist discourses. And if you are interested in publications from that stage of the research, we have plenty of reports, including summaries in local languages and also summaries of case study findings. All this is available on our website. Now, moving on to the second stage. In this stage, the team listened to the lived experiences of anti-gender, exploring the effects that anti-gender politics have on everyday lives and what strategies people adopt to cope with these effects. And this time, 9 case studies were analyzed, and these encompass the national context listed here, plus a transnational context of people living in exile in Europe. And from February to May last year, the team conducted 104 interviews, 36 focus groups, and 58 relief maps, with the total number of all people involved adding up to 254. Now, a note on the relief map. This is an online tool, apparently. I've never used that. An online tool for data analysis and visualization, and it demonstrated that effects of anti-gender vary also in spatial terms, with oppression being experienced most significantly in public spaces, institutions, social networks, and places of worship, and in contrast, home, friendship, and to a slightly lesser extent, affective relationships were the main places of relief where people found solace. When it comes to the effects of anti-gender politics, these encompass a broad range of negative experiences, ranging from downright violations such as physical and verbal assaults, damage to property, intimidation, and death threats, to institutionally enabled discrimination and limited academic freedoms. Persons across all case study contexts reported feelings of burnout and apathy, which were accompanied by distrust in institutions and a disbelief in social change. Importantly, the study showed that the effects of anti-gender creep into queer feminist communities, resulting in intra-community divides, for instance, related to trans exclusionary radical feminists and sex work exclusionary radical feminists. Now, it is important to remember that despite the pervasive nature of anti-gender discourses and attacks, participants of the study did not perceive themselves as mere passive victims. And across all case study contexts, it was established that they challenge anti-gender discourses and policies while striving to create safer and more livable spaces for themselves and for their close ones. To cope with anti-gender mobilizations, some persons withdrew from activism and other forms of public engagements in order to protect their well-being. Often their energy was reinvested in communities and networks and friendships and chosen families, building extensive practices of care and support. And some people cut down on their social media usage and internet usage in general in order to detach themselves from the main source of hate speech and a lot of negative stimuli. But some, on the other hand, followed those anti-gender discourses in order to fuel their rage, which in turn fueled their further activist engagement. And Roberto and Katia will talk more about the research results from the case studies on Poland and Belarus. And again, there's a whole body of publications available. There's QR code because I recently learned how to do QR codes. So now I will post them on every single presentation that I make. And this one leads to the resources page on our website where you can click the links and download our stuff. We also have, of course, academia and ResearchGate and all that, all these platforms. And another QR code will take you to our newsletter page where you can sign up if you want to keep in touch. And that is all for me. And now I will pass it on to Katia or Roberto.
Katia. Yes, Katia. We'll go now. Very briefly, we'll go for, we shall go now for 25 minutes more of presentations, roughly 10-15 minutes, specifically focusing on stage 2, so listening in Belarus and Poland. And after this, we'll have some Q&A. Okay. Let's, Katia, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Roberto and Ada, for a lovely introduction into the RESIST project. So I'm Ekaterina Filep, another member of the RESIST. And in this presentation, I would like to share with you the findings pertaining to anti-gender politics that we have for Belarus. I'll start with the, oops. I'll start with the first slide. Well, first of all, I would like to say that precaution when it comes to Belarus was our primary concern, because I think Belarus does not require introduction when it comes to the state of the politics and the repression that activists, human rights defenders, feminists, and queer communities are experiencing. So we were very lucky that we had people who, despite this political situation, agreed to collaborate with us, and we were able to conduct 12 individual interviews where people shared in depth their perceptions of anti-gender politics. And we had also one focus group discussion where we had a group dynamic where we could share perspectives on anti-gender. So I would like to share some of the insights of what we have gathered. Well, first of all, just a conceptual remark. The concept anti-gender politics itself was rarely used and was considered somewhat misleading by people in Belarus because it was not clear what it meant. Anti-gender could also imply actually a positive connotation of abolishing binary gender division. And in general, although some people knew it through academic exchanges, they found that particularly for Belarus, such concepts as repression, state violence, homophobia, anti-queer hostilities were more suitable terms, lacking more straightforward reference to violence and oppression. In the course of the focus groups and individual interviews, it became immediately apparent that anti-gender politics is overwhelmingly associated with the state, imposing, promoting, and discussing discriminatory legislation almost on a daily basis, with the new legislation coming up on promotion of non-normative sexualities. As one participant said, in a state where even basic human rights are violated with ease, anti-gender politics is a part of the same machinery. So, yes, the state is considered the primary driver of anti-gender politics. And of course, here we also have all the academic and medical institutions and other state establishments. Participants shared experiences of being misinformed, manipulated, and shamed for reproductive issues, for example, dating back as a decade ago and longer. People also spoke about anti-gender campaigns. Some participants noted a rise in pro-life funding and state media reinforcing traditional gender roles, pressuring women to prioritize reproduction. Feminist and queer organizations spoke about masculinist and sex-based rights groups and organizations, which are intimidating feminist groups, creating further climate of hostility and fear. But interestingly enough, people said that anti-gender persists also in exile, persistent immigration, and referred to pro-democracy circles, saying that even in exile and even being in pro-democracy circle, they still confront anti-gender politics. Even those of people who are advocating for democracy and freedom, many of them fail to integrate gender equality into their visions of democracy. And many participants said how sad they find it that in pro-democracy chats, for example, sometimes they hear the same rhetoric, which is hostile to queer and feminist people, as you hear on the state media. And it is very difficult to lobby feminist and queer agenda in pro-democracy circles. Another example of anti-gender was specifically linked to coordinated smear campaigns online, which target queer and feminist activists. Participants highlighted that they have noted, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, that the nature of these attacks is organized. So they have observed, because of the nature of these attacks and how many resources are being put into profiling activists, compiling information on them, exposing this information, that it is most likely not individual or random actors, but this is clearly an organized campaign aiming to intimidate and expose feminist and queer activists. They have spoken about specific Telegram channels or chats which expose activists, and then this results in prosecution and intimidation of activists. Several people said that following such smear campaigns online, they feared leaving the house, had to stop their presence online, and literally lived in fear for months. Basically, when we thought about the effect of anti-gender politics, so what is the major effect that this anti-gender politics has on daily lives of people, whether still living in Belarus or living in exile, and the overwhelming effect was fear. So there is a fear of state repression. There is a growing anticipation of violence, not least because of this discriminatory legislation that is being passed, the one that, for example, equates non-conformative gender identities to pornography or pedophilia, or the promotion of homosexuality. So there is a growing anticipation of violence in public spaces, combined with the fear of reporting the abuse. So should something happen, there is nowhere to turn to. And the fear of reporting abuse is particularly strong among queer people, but also women with children. Women with children fear that the children might be taken away by state authorities, and queer individuals fear experiencing even more violence should they refer to state authorities for reporting the abuse. In this climate of fear, extreme anonymity was discussed as a resistance and a survival mechanism, and isolation was discussed as an effect of these hostilities. So because people have to adhere to such heightened security risks, isolation is one of the strongest effects of anti-gender. Hardly there are any safe spaces for queer and feminist gatherings in Belarus. And even despite of us having these interviews and discussions, it has remained unknown to us whether there are actually any physical gatherings in Belarus. For obvious reasons, people would not share this kind of information. What we know is that even prior to 2020, organizing any physical events in Belarus required heightened precautions with multiple stages of security. And even with those precautions, they were still infiltrated. Infiltrated people sometimes coming to these events. So organizers of events had to weigh heightened security measures against responsibility they have for inviting people, which has led to severe burnout. And yes, it has been very difficult for people to organize anything. At the moment, we don't know if anything actually takes place in Belarus, most likely not. But even in exile, people still continue experiencing isolation and heightened fears. People have spoken about emotional toll of experiencing trauma, and burnout continued also in exile. As I said, many were forced to leave the country. For many, migration was not a decision they would have taken in other circumstances. Many have left their families behind. It was for many a response to the hostilities they have experienced, a fear of arrest or being arrested and released, and fearing further arrests. So, but at the same time, migration, although forced, was also discussed as a resistance strategy and as a way of surviving. People who have left Belarus continue their activism abroad, and some have shared some of the resistance strategies continuing the activism abroad. So online activism and media engagement remain quite widespread. People are producing educational content online, however possible, interviewing queer, like normalizing queer and feminist identities online, building international solidarity networks, however, with limited reservations. Because even abroad, people have to still adhere to strict security protocols. Building networks requires trust, but also resources. And at the moment, those people who have left Belarus and continue their activism abroad, first of all and foremost, have to first ensure their basic survival needs are met, their basic security needs are met, and then very carefully building networks and collaborating, but on a very selective and trust-based basis. what people also shared, an important resistance strategy is archiving feminist and queer history, because a lot of the resources were, like the websites were closed down, a lot of the databases have been lost. And at the moment, if people say it's very important that we do not lose the records of what has been done, so that we have a continued intergenerational dialogue. So there is work being done on archiving, documenting the resistance strategies during the protests, after the protests, and what has been done, what worked, what didn't work, writing books, memoirs, and databases. But of course, at the moment, because people are still dealing with trauma of everything that has happened, people are still processing, prioritizing self-care, including physical and mental care, remains the major strategy of resistance for the majority of the people. And I think with that, I have outlined the majority of, like, you can still read in more detail the findings pertaining to Belarus on the website, and they are available in English as well as in Russian. But I think these were the main insights from the Belarus. And now I would like to pass the floor to my colleague Roberto.
Great, thank you, Katia, very much so for this presentation. Okay, I guess we start itching a little bit. It's half an hour since we're sitting here, so bear with me for another 15 minutes. We'll go then with some Q&A. What just came to me actually is also something that perhaps we can pick it up for later for the discussions. Is also different coverage when we talk about anti-gender movements in terms of the geopolitics of knowledge. And it struck me and came back to me again that, for example, Belarus is not widely talked or covered or thought of in general in scholarship as one of the cases, in contrast, for example, to Hungary or Poland, which together with Russia often stand in this, triangle of evil and, bad noirs in political or research kind of narratives, the stuff. Well, perhaps later on we can also pick up on those kind of attention given to different contexts and why it's going on. I'll try to go quicker with the Polish case because sadly or happily, what I'm going to say is nothing new. There's nihil novi sub sole in this presentation, what we wouldn't know already. And it is sad because it very much proves to the persistence of the issues, problems, and troubles in this. But perhaps it's something also that can be seen as something positive, because perhaps it shows certain saturation of techniques and effects. And it seems that we are reaching that moment when we know what we're dealing with. And perhaps for us, for the people who are interested in fighting back those oppressive mobilizations, maybe it is in this sense something optimistic, because there's no new surprising things coming up on us, and we can bring what we know now, what we feel and think and see as a kind of core of the problems, and arm ourselves to fight back and start increasing our fight back against this. Okay, so let's go.
Sorry, I don't have.
Yes?
I cannot connect my. No. Okay.
So, could the people online?
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Just give me back to the stuff where I am. There it is. No. Right. I've lost my presentation. I'll be wait. Okay, I'll share again. Give me a second. Okay. people coming in. So overall, my presentation I've divided in four sections. First, a couple of words what people understand in our study as anti-gender. Then I'll overview the negative effects of anti-gender mobilizations. Then present a little bit more on those few unexpected, perhaps, and we'll end on the coping mechanisms and resistances. What does anti-gender mean? Generally, it's something what we found that it is a recognizable term to some degree, but it is not used neither among the people who work in the activism or among general populations. And more specific terminology like patriarchy, anti-feminism, feminism, transphobia, or homophobia are preferred and used by people. And usually with the argumentation that these capture more problems. And anti-gender is seen as something more used in political discourses by policymakers or within the research, but not something that really captures or is used on the kind of on the ground. So it's in something used to mobilized in certain political spheres. No, I will. Then you see the kind of certain, here's one quote. I will not be reading the quotes out loud of one of the participants who kind of tries to think what it embraces, and what you see is that the person points to the role of Catholic Church in Poland. It points to the set of public intellectuals, as we could call, for example, doctors, medical professionals, journalists, etc., and individuals. Now, what are the lived experiences of anti-gender mobilizations in our findings in the Polish case? Well, first of all, they are very diverse in response to the very diverse scope of what the different anti-gender mobilizations do or where they reach. These are, for example, hateful language and offensive communications, personal attacks. When online, especially, they seem to be following and attacking people on the bodily perceptions. So fat shaming is a popular kind of slur that is used as people reported. Death threats, other forms of intimidations. Some of them will appear later on. For example, Ordo Juris, it's a notorious Polish organization. It was reported that they sent a group of people to attend different meetings to induce the freezing effects, the chilling effects on the participants, seeing the group of usually kind of young men presence, in the block. Other experiences are such as ridicule, being ridiculed, that especially concerns trans and non-binary people, and of course, unfortunately, also institutional discriminations. And that again concerns strongly trans and non-binary people. Here is one of the examples of one of our respondents, a parent of a trans a boy who talks about their experience of trying to sort those basic formalities within the system, like reassigning the official state number, the PESEL, and then trying to open a bank account, and how the interconnectedness of those state systems, private systems like bank accounts, possibilities of re-articulating one's identity and proving oneself becomes very much problematic with the solution as the person talks here given by the bank official. Well, it would be easier for the son to open a new account as with the new peso as well, rather than trying to change the existing account details. So now, what are the negative effects of anti-gender mobilizations that were reported in our case? Desensitization and sense of apathy and detachment among all our participants, feeling overwhelmed, burnout, negative impacts on mental health, depression, anxieties, and also, and this is also perhaps something that struck me personally, is a certain narrative normalization of the status quo. So acceptance of all this, but perhaps acceptance not in terms of giving up the fight, but really hard to capture, the kind of taken as it is. I mean, like this sort of a bitter recognition that we should not, or we may not expect better in some way. There was that kind of underlying kind of narrative sentiment in our interviews and focus groups. Some more of those negative effects, self-censorship and self-silencing in workplaces and public spaces, moving to other cities to be able to live more freely, independently, very sad and tragic situations of people taking their own life as well were reported. And overall, what I've mentioned, that disbelief in the possibility of systematic change at the institutional level and disillusions with public institutions and law enforcement services. And finally, what we also found is that the anti-gender mobilizations also feed internally, and they fuel certain existing divisions within queer feminist movements. We'll come to it later on, I'm sure. This especially relates to transphobia among different groups. What also was noted that people who are multiply marginalized because of their gender, sexual identity, but also, for example, because they are people with disabilities or because of other positions, they've also reported double standards and increasing rifts in addressing their needs. And later on, I've mentioned this, very often felt that they need to prioritize and make very harmful choices between their kind of occupied positions. There are some intergenerational tensions that we've observed between different generations of people and people engaged in activism in how they perceive situation and want to fight. Also, academic institutions and knowledge productions have been attacked, and we also have reported cases of successful managing of political figures into independence of educational institutions. So these are the negative effects. Here's one of the quote again, and now on the next slide I will move on to some of the unexpected effects that perhaps offer a glimpse of hope for us here, as what we found among our participants is that there is, despite all these very gloom picture out there, there is a stronger mobilization of general population towards queer feminist causes. Almost all our participants reported that they observe in their circles, in everyday life, greater support among general society there. There is also a geographical element that is important. So engagement in support, not only in metropolitan big cities, but also in smaller towns, villages, and cities outside of those big circles. So really kind of that mobilization that is not just in few places, but is spreading across the whole country. There is certain boom in self-organization, volunteering, and grassroots community building initiatives reported, along the increased visibility of queer feminist issues in popular culture and mainstream media, as well as support that groups receive from private business and also from the public figures, celebrities, people who no longer tend to shy away from supporting queer feminist causes and feel more open to talk about it publicly. And again, quote here that kind of shows from one of our participants how those ricochet, so as I call it here, effects pen against the grain of those who wage those anti-gender fear-mongering among us. And finally, the last section is the coping mechanism and the resistances. So how people deal with these. So there is, as I mentioned, withdrawal, but withdrawal not as capitulation, but as self-preservation and the recuperation of the energies. There are mobilizing affects importance, especially rage and anger seem to be a sort of a feeling to which some of the participants tend to cling on as something that makes them go on and not to give up. In the same time, also holding on to kindness, goodwill, and support that people report to us, that they received from their friends, from passerbys. So not only within the communities of care existing, but also from general population, as I've mentioned. Then role of relationships, such as friendships, and love and care. Once again to highlight it, and it was something that was really heartwarming for us and something positive. And I think we're stressing here that's because it was really a kind of a message that we've been receiving. I mean, like in Poland, but I think also in a moment we can. As Katia, as you've heard, was saying in the Belarusian case, but also in other cases in our project, that hopeful narrative was really something that our participants tried to communicate to us, which I think is also quite important in our thinking. How do we think about the anti-gender politically and academically? Perhaps because so far there is a lot of attention to that negative dimension of anti-gender mobilizations, effects, and that very kind of doom and gloom sort of narratives, and not much of that more hopeful narratives. So perhaps this is something for us for the next session to discuss. How do we feel about this more hopeful perspectives? Then a few other coping mechanisms: education for social transformation, informal help from walking people home, calling check-ins, to more formal, like organizing shelters and legal help for people who migrated, especially in the last couple of years, for Ukrainian refugees. But also certain willful remodeling of the existing resources. And this especially concerns using institutional resources sort of in a not sabotage way, but against the grain of the institutions, which are very bureaucratic, and very often those bureaucratic procedures perform and perpetuate certain harm on individuals. But also those bureaucratic procedures by people, by administrators and people within institutions are often used to offer some more human-centered help and raise certain issues to people in need, using that institutional bloatedness as a sort of smokescreen and cover up to be able to do the actual work on the ground with people in need. So there is that sort of active reuse kind of the institutional kind of exactly bloating stuff, and this works in especially in the larger institutions in different sectors. And finally, also I've mentioned that intergenerational tensions appeared, but also much of the intergenerational hope and collaboration at the same time was reported to us. There's also, as I've mentioned, that kind of re-engagement with the enemy, to know their next move, to know what's going on. So doom scrolling as that. There is also certain Schadenfreude, knowing that what we do as queer feminist people engaging in social issues and the work that is being done still makes the reaction that the people who perpetuate certain anti-gender mobilizations, different discourses of politics, are still reacting to it. There is a sign of hope that what we do brings an effect, that the fight, the labor that we do opposing them makes sense, because they are still reacting. They try to, they still mobilize, they fight back. So there is certain kind of exactly kind of Schadenfreude that was there, but also optimism coming with this, seeing that it makes sense, that it is worth to be engaged. And as I mentioned, persistence, perseverance, and stubbornness are other ways of engaging. Maybe I'll skip that quote. And final point, just to highlight, I think what is very important is that multiplications of the challenges for the people who are multiply marginalized and forced into harmful choices. It was unfortunately reported that people who need to, in their everyday life, navigate those different exclusions very often feel forced to give up on the fight or on claims or their aspirations, especially around the gender and sexual identities and needs, in order to be able to secure some other needs, for example, access because of their disabilities or health conditions, or because of their migrant status, etc. Yes, so that's it from me. Thank you very much for listening. Here's again the well-prepared by Ada QR codes. We'll finish the presentations now.